Now we dive into our ever so fun talk about segregation of duties as it relates to the expenditure cycle. We're going to see these examples now. Obviously, this is kind of double dipping, helping you out with when it comes to fraud, when it comes to internal controls. Here, we want to discuss these specific segregation of duties that have to do with expenditure cycle. Now, first off, we can test the segregation of duties as the auditor by verifying that purchase orders are issued by the purchasing department, which has the authorization function. This should purchase orders, right? That is something that needs to be submitted in order for you to actually buy something as a company. And that needs to be issued by those who have the authority, the authorization to do so. Next up, we can verify that the accounts payable department, which is we've seen is in charge of record keeping, making sure that they compare information on each vendor's invoice with the receiving report. So the information on the vendor's invoice says we are charging you for 10 pieces of inventory. The receiving report should also say 10 pieces of inventory, and the purchase order should say that we purchased 10 pieces of inventory to assure that the goods were received and that the purchase was properly authorized. This is an important one. I would actually definitely make a note of this one and know this for sure, that again, the accounts payable department should compare these three documents. That's actually pretty important. So keep that in mind. This is a great way to ensure that the expenditure cycle is operating properly. Next up, we can examine a sample of paid vouchers to determine if each voucher is stamped paid by the check signer to provide assurance that each voucher is submitted and paid only once. What is this? Well, this is a voucher payable. So this is going to come across someone's desk. It says this is a bill, you got to pay it. And once it's paid, you should have a stamp or some way of marking the invoice, right? Marking the voucher that it is paid. Because once you mark it paid, it's not going to get accidentally paid again, right? Because whether maliciously or by accident, you could see that same voucher on your desk and you could pay it again for a second time. So that's something to keep in mind, something to watch out for so you don't double pay something. Lastly, here we can ensure that the client is matching purchase orders, receiving reports, and vendor invoices, as we saw up here. For preparing each voucher are independently matched in the AP department. This process would detect vouchers that were prepared for the payment of goods that were not received. So essentially, this is saying the same thing. It's the same process as bullet point 2. However, in this case, it's also saying that by doing this, we could detect vouchers that were prepared for goods that were not received. And it could actually do even more than that, right? If we're comparing what we're being billed for versus what we got versus what we asked for, you see how much you can really authenticate with those three documents. Super important. If you ever want to run a business, these are good practices for doing so as well. If you ever start your successful business, attribute it to what you learned here with me. Okay, you don't have to. Just take me out for coffee one day. That'd be nice. Let's talk about our internal controls when it comes to the expenditure cycle. Well, the following are examples of properly designed controls. Keep that in mind. It's proper, not improper. Well, if we match purchase orders, receiving reports, and vendor invoices, this is the same thing that we just saw. I'm going to be honest, it's very important. Just get it down. This is the third time we're seeing it. I don't bring things up 3 times for no good reason. This comes up a lot in questions. So again, this process of matching these 3 items in the AP department will help you solve a lot of issues. Next up, an employee matches vendor invoices with receiving reports, which that's the process of authorization, and recomputes the calculations on the vendor invoices to check that the company is not being overcharged and will not overpay. Another great example of a properly designed internal control. Next up, we want to make sure that the individual who signs a check for payment of a voucher payable reviews and cancels the voucher packet to ensure that the same voucher is not presented and paid a second time, which also avoids duplicate payments. Perfect. Now, as I mentioned, we were going to talk about what the voucher packet is. A voucher packet is a group of documents which typically includes an invoice, a check, and a receipt. Got a lot of details on this particular purchase. The voucher packet is going to be used to verify that the expenses were actually incurred, as well as to collect any additional information needed to process the payment. Whenever we see the voucher packet come up, now we know what it is. Talk about existence when it comes to the balance of expense. Well, here we go. Like I said, we've got the same exact definitions. Make sure you have these memorized. You want to make a flashcards of them. You memorize the chart I got for you. Now, really, one of the best things here, verify the existence of expenses. You're going to test vouchers and matching the receiving report for authorization. Vouchers are going to have the actual expenses that they've incurred, Going to match to the receiving report, make sure everything here was properly authorized, which is going to help you with the assertion of existence. Completeness, what are we going to do here? Well, in this case, we could also trace the vouchers to the purchase journal and accounting for pre-numbered sequencing of purchase orders. So tracing the vouchers to the purchase journal, making sure that, okay, any physical proof, right? We've got this piece of paper of a purchase, trace that to the journal, like the records of the purchases. And also we can account for pre-numbered sequencing of purchase orders, meaning we have purchase order number one, purchase order number two. We got numbers and all the way to the thousands, to the millions. Obviously, maybe it resets at a certain point every year. And this is, just like check number one, each check has its individual number. Now, making sure that every purchase order is accounted for, right? Because if we know that they go from 1 to 100, you want to make sure that all 100 documents are included. Obviously, maybe you've thrown some out, you didn't use some. So those would be notes that you'd have to look at as the accountant. Just some points to keep in mind, right? Again, to make sure that all expenses are accounted for, kind of like looking in your checkbook and making sure that you have a record of all of the checks from check 100 to check 200. Same sort of concept there. What about occurrence? Well, occurrence, we're really going to focus in on this one. We're going to test vouchers and matching the receiving report for authorization, making sure that when we issued these vouchers, when we tried to make these purchases, that it was properly authorized. That's going to be our number one process here. What are we going to do when it comes to valuation, allocation, and accuracy when it comes to expenses? Well, I would say recompute the accuracy of vendor invoices, make sure that the expenses that they're actually incurring are accurate based on the vendor amounts that the vendor is trying to charge you. That is going to come from matching from the other documents, right? Essentially, this is going to come down to, right, just what are our receiving reports, making sure that we are receiving the proper amount, looking on the vendor's website, how much did they charge for this, making sure that it's an accurate amount. And if you need to verify that, obviously go wherever you need to go, talk to whoever you need to verify that those are the appropriate dollar amounts. Let's talk about cutoff. Well, cutoff for expenses, making sure that expenses are accrued for in the proper year. What would we do? Well, the auditor would test the cutoff for expenses by performing tests designed to detect purchases made before the end of the year that have been recorded in the subsequent year. Also confirming the nature of expenses that were recorded in the prior year but paid in the current year. So similar to our revenues, just kind of check those expenses and revenues that were at the end of the year and the beginning of the year. Review the timing of invoice payments and receipts, examining the accuracy of the accrual and cutoff entries, and lastly, reconciling the expenditure accounts. Actually, pretty dang similar to what we saw when it came to revenue. When we get to presentation and disclosure, what are we going to do? Just similar to revenue, verify that expenses are properly classified in the correct accounts. Pretty broad, but also that encompasses everything we need to know. Hey there! Are you ready to not only pass your CPA exams, but truly understand and enjoy the material while studying? I know it seems impossible, right? Especially to enjoy the material? We'll do it together. Tap into the power of CPA.examprep.ai, where we've got personalized quizzes, multiple choice questions, memorization guides, flashcards, simulations, all tailored to your learning. Our adaptive study planning puts you on the fastest path to success and lifts you back up if you fall behind. Avoid wasting your precious time and money attempting an exam with a low chance of passing, because who wants that? We want to get you through this process as quick as possible. Our exam readiness prediction lets you walk in with confidence, knowing that you're prepared for success on exam day. Thankfully, there's no payment method needed to get started, so why don't you come join us? Visit cpa.examprep.ai and let's achieve your exam success together.